Now, the latest second quarter crime statistics reflecting crimes that occurred from the 1st of July to the end of September 2023 have shown that although sexual offences decreased by 35.9%, more than 10,000 rape incidents and 1,500 incidents of attempted murder involving female victims were reported to the SABC. In response to gender-based violence, the Faith Action to End GBV Collective has embarked on a mobilisation campaign that has seen diverse faith leaders and communities taking a public pledge aimed at preventing gender-based violence and achieving the goals of the National Strategic Plan to End GBV and Femicide. To find out more about how the faith-based sector is tackling gender-based violence and femicide and forming movements, we are joined by Daniela Gennrich. She's the coordinator of the We Will Speak Out South Africa Coalition. Daniela, thank you. Thank you very, very much for being with us here on Morning Live.
Thank you for having me, Leanne and Sakina.
So let's begin. Greetings. Thank
yes.
you. What are the objectives of this We Will Speak Out South Africa and the Faith Action to End GBV Collective?
So it's about conscientizing and equipping the faith sector to address gender-based violence, but it's very easy to address, to talk about gender-based violence. As the faith sector, we also have to look at some of the underlying drivers of gender-based violence. And given that over 80% of our population subscribe to a particular religion, we also have to review what we teach and our religious practices and the extent to which perhaps some of those things are influencing social attitudes and norms that make it possible for gender-based violence to be condoned. So we are trying to organize around working with the faith sector, both those that are traditionally a little bit resistant or very resistant. And there is also a growing movement of progressive faith actors that are really wanting to review and look at what we have offered in the past and some of the mistakes we have made, and ways that we are much more able to address the issues much more head on, because we believe that the way service providers, even in our own sectors and in all sectors of society, the underlying attitudes towards women and the condoning of male domination and so on can sometimes be taken back to narrow and incorrect interpretations of our sacred texts that have been quite prevalent, as well as some of our practices that we have kind of absorbed and taken forward. So we need to review and relook at who we are and how we've stood in terms of gender-based violence and gender relations in general, and work towards drawing on the positive aspects of our traditions and our sacred texts to be able to shift the narrative in ways that are much more life-giving and much more able to address the issues of gender-based violence we are experiencing.
Yeah. I want to bring the role of faith-based organizations. And, the reality is that we're still living in a very patriarchal society. And when you look at various religious institutions, and we're not going to pick out different religions, we're just going to, in general, speak to the fact that there is still a very much so patriarchy society within religious organizations. Men and women worship in different places in some instances. When you do go to different church services or different faith-based organizations, you see men spreading the word as opposed to seeing the presence of women. How difficult is it for females to be a part of these male-dominated faith sectors?
Well, yes, to be honest, it is not easy. It is also because of the use often of sacred texts to justify these kinds of things, it becomes very, very difficult. But there are many examples within all of our sacred texts of female leaders and female women that have really taken forward liberatory agendas. And it's about uncovering some of those texts that have been conveniently set aside often or misinterpreted. I mean, the most obvious one is in the Christian faith, that oddly enough, the many churches have refused women to be allowed to be, as you say, ministers in the church. And yet Jesus himself, the cornerstone of our faith, when he was raised from the dead, he didn't first reveal himself to men. He revealed himself to a woman in the person of Jesus, and he sent her to share the good news with men and with the disciples that are recorded as being the 12 of his disciples. So if it was not the intention for women to be leaders, why then would our prophet, our God Emmanuel, have sent a woman to share the good news? So it's about uncovering some of those texts that have been misused or misinterpreted or just simply ignored. There are many examples within the scriptures that actually would hopefully, and do in many cases, help to shift the kind of narrative and open up the spaces.
Yeah, and that's.
But of course, I just want to.
Sorry, I know I'm interrupting you. It's just I'm watching the time, and we've got quite a bit to get through, and I'm sure you will be able to make your point. But I mean, just to add on a little bit, I mean, religious institutions have always been regarded as places of safety by many communities. They have, but unfortunately, over the years, we've witnessed some leaders becoming the exact perpetrators of gender-based violence in the name of offering spiritual guidance to trusting victims. Again, we've obviously there's a fine balance between all of this, and I ask, how rife is gender-based violence and femicide within this sector?
Well, I guess the honest answer to that is that I think a lot is covered up. I do think that in any context where too much power is given to leadership, and particularly in a context where leadership might have God on their side, or at least draw on that, even if it's not true, it does create a very huge power differential. We have got, as one of our key 3 different working groups, one of the working groups is looking specifically at accountability and what can be done around the issues of exactly that, how to root out the rot, as it were, and how to ensure that those who are misusing their power within the faith sector are brought to book. And some of the churches and other institutions have really tried to set up structures to enable that to happen. But as you can imagine, there is a fair amount of pushback with regard to that. And so one just has to push on. But, we often have, and in many of the contexts where we work with faith leaders, and there's often this talk about how do we make our faith spaces safe spaces. And the response of one particular faith leader some years ago keeps resonating for us, which is, if I am not a safe space, I cannot talk about making my place of worship a safe space. And so we work in a holistic way also for people, and particularly faith leaders, to become much more aware of their power and how they use their power, and to address the issues at a personal level as well as at a structural and institutional level.
Absolutely. But let's sort of round this together, because I know that the conversation can go on forever about, faith-based organizations, and perhaps that's a separate conversation that we need to have. But the reality is that there is an effort to try and put an end to gender-based violence and femicide. And it doesn't matter where this comes from, as long as there is an effort, and we are seeing that there is a collective. And Faith Action to End GBV Collective, this is the organization. You have signed a statement and launched a signature campaign. Perhaps you can tell us more about the commitments that have been made and how we can become involved as well.
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, we do have on our website, www.wwsosa.org.za, We have a summary statement as well as a longer statement. And in the statement, we clearly outline our understanding of the context. We also outline our failings, which I think is very, very important. And so not only do we make commitments because they would be hollow if we didn't also recognize where we have gone wrong. And then we also outline the common values. We've workshopped over many months with between 8 different faiths. What are the common values and principles that unite us, which are actually more than those that divide us, amazingly enough, and that we draw on those, and our commitment is to draw on those values, which are, sort of basically love, oneness, equal dignity, peace, justice and mercy, and respect for life. And within that context, we can commit together to addressing some of the underlying factors, like, as I've mentioned, the need to amplify aspects in our sacred texts that are life-giving, that promote mutuality and equality, and do not condone violence in any form, and certainly gender-based violence. Well, we've committed to being much more vocal about gender-based violence. We've committed to not covering up when something does happen in our context, and to setting up structures and systems that will deal with those issues. Okay, we got to leave it there. Daniela, we have to. We have to leave it, unfortunately, as much as I want to continue, because it is important. But please, people, get out there, have a look at this End GBV Collective. It's called Faith Action to End GBV Collective. Have a look. We Will Speak Out SA Coalition. Daniela Gennrich is the coordinator.